My name is Rose, and I am 68 years old. As a retired public notary and court records archivist, I dedicated my career to meticulously verifying legal documents and upholding the highest standards of integrity and truth. My father, Arthur, who passed away 20 years ago, was a paragon of honesty and ethical business practices, a man whose word was his bond in every aspect of his life. I had always assumed that his financial affairs were as transparent and straightforward as everything else about him. My mother, Eleanor, who bravely navigated 20 years of widowhood with grace and dignity, was a woman whose memory I cherished and whose sacrifices for our family I thought I fully understood. I believed with absolute certainty in our family's unwavering foundation of honesty, integrity, and mutual respect. Then, like a lightning bolt that destroys everything in its path, a chilling letter arrived from Mr. Silas Hayes, a debt collector whose very existence I had never imagined. The words on that page shattered my entire world. My father had apparently left behind a secret debt of $500,000 from a failed business venture that had been hidden for decades. Even more devastating, my mother had somehow managed to secretly pay $350,000 of this debt from her own savings over the years, a sacrifice so enormous that it took my breath away. My children, Mark and Lisa, instead of offering comfort or support, raged at me with accusations that cut like knives. How could you not know about this? Dad was obviously a criminal. You're losing your mind if you think we're responsible for his debts. My father's integrity, my mother's incredible sacrifice, my family's fundamental truth. Everything I had built my life upon was being maliciously shattered. I felt utterly discarded, financially ruined, and completely alone in a world that no longer made sense. Yet, as despair threatened to consume me entirely, something deep within my archivist's soul began to stir. 4 decades of examining legal documents and detecting irregularities had taught me to look beyond surface appearances and question inconsistencies that others might miss. What Mr. Hayes, Mark, Lisa, and my brother Robert didn't know was my most powerful secret weapon, a certified digital backup of my parents' original financial records, that I had meticulously preserved documents that would prove the will left me completely clear of any debt responsibility. Even more damning, I possessed voice recordings of my mother's private conversations discussing my brother Robert's manipulation and her secret payments made under duress. My retired chief probate judge ally was waiting in the wings, ready to help me fight for justice. This time, their insidious fraud wouldn't just unravel. It would be exposed for what it truly was. My family's honor would be reclaimed, and the truth would triumph over deception, but at an agonizing cost that would test everything I believed about family loyalty and love. The morning after receiving Mr. Hayes's devastating letter, I spent sleepless hours staring at the ceiling, trying to process how my father's legacy could have been so thoroughly misrepresented, and how my own family could turn against me so quickly. I needed answers, and I needed to understand how this nightmare had been allowed to unfold without my knowledge. With trembling hands but determined resolve, I drove to my parents' former home, the beautiful Victorian house where I had grown up and where so many precious family memories had been created. The house that my brother Robert now claimed as his exclusive domain, despite our parents' will, clearly stating it should be shared equally between us. Robert was waiting for me in the front parlor, sitting in our father's favorite chair, with an air of ownership that immediately set my nerves on edge. Brenda, his wife of 15 years, stood behind him with her arms across her face, set in an expression of barely concealed irritation that I had dared to request this meeting. Robert, I began gently settling into the chair across from him that had once been our mother's favorite spot. I need to understand what's happening with this debt situation. Mr. Hayes's letter doesn't make sense to me. Dad was always so careful with money, so transparent about our family's finances. How could there be a $500,000 debt that none of us knew about? Robert's response was immediate and coldly dismissive. Rose, you wouldn't understand complex finances or modern estate law. You've spent your whole career filing papers and stamping documents, not dealing with real business investments or financial strategies. You're too old and too set in your ways to grasp the complexities of what Dad was trying to accomplish in his final years. The condescension in his voice was like a slap across my face, but he wasn't finished. With a sneer that transformed his familiar features into something almost unrecognizable, he continued, Dad and Mom implicitly trusted me to handle the difficult decisions, the ones that required real business acumen. You're just being greedy and delusional now, thinking you deserve something you never earned. I've been managing this family's financial affairs for years, while you played with your little archive projects. Brenda stepped forward, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. Rose, honey, we know this is hard for you to accept, but Arthur specifically chose Robert to handle these matters because he has the business background to understand complicated financial instruments. Your father left that debt because he was trying to provide for the family's future, and Robert has been working tirelessly to manage the consequences. The casual way they were rewriting our family's history, turning my father's memory into a justification for what seemed like obvious financial manipulation, was almost unbearable. But I pressed on, hoping to reach some vestige of the brother I thought I knew. Robert, please, I said, my voice breaking, despite my efforts to remain composed. Mom and Dad always emphasized fairness and honesty above everything else. They explicitly told us both that their estate would be divided equally, that neither of us would be left in financial distress. Mom even paid $350,000 of this supposed debt to protect our family's future. How can you stand there and tell me that Dad intended for me to be responsible for debts I never knew existed? Before Robert could respond, my son. Mark burst through the front door, his face flushed with anger and his voice already raised to a volume that made me flinch. Mom, how could you not know about any of this? He screamed, pacing the room like a caged animal. You always talked about being so careful, with documents so thorough, with family records, and you missed a $500,000 debt. Grandpa was obviously involved in something shady, and Grandma helped cover it up. You're losing your mind if you think Mark and I are going to pay for their mistakes. His words hit me like physical blows, each accusation more painful than the last. This was my son, the boy I had raised to value truth and fairness, now turning my parents' memory into something dirty and shameful. Lisa arrived moments later, tears already streaming down her face, adding her own devastating commentary. Mom, don't you understand what this means? Our inheritance is completely gone because of this debt. Our children's college funds, our retirement security, everything we were counting on has been stolen by Grandpa's lies. Why didn't you protect us from this? How could you be so naive and irresponsible? The pain of hearing my own children characterize my beloved parents as liars and criminals was almost unbearable, but Brenda's next words pushed the knife even deeper. Honestly, Rose, she said with a laugh that sounded genuinely amused, your sentimental attachment to your parents' reputation is costing all of us a fortune. You're being a complete fool if you can't see that Arthur made terrible business decisions and Eleanor enabled his recklessness. It's time to face reality instead of clinging to fantasies about their supposed integrity. The room fell silent, except for the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Here were people who had benefited from my parents' generosity for decades, who had been welcomed into family celebrations and supported through difficult times, now casually destroying their memory to justify what looked increasingly like theft. The formal documents that Robert produced next were clearly designed to intimidate and confuse me. He spread them across the coffee table with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been preparing for this moment for a long time. These papers make everything official. Rose, he said, his voice taking on a bureaucratic tone that made him sound like a stranger. Mr. Hayes has filed formal notice that the debt must be satisfied within 30 days, or he'll begin foreclosure proceedings on any assets that can be attached to the estate. That includes your house, Rose, since you're listed as a beneficiary of Dad's will. The threat was clear and terrifying. My modest home, the place where I had lived for over 30 years and where I had planned to spend my remaining years in peace, was being held hostage to a debt I had never incurred and knew nothing about. But the final humiliation was yet to come. When I asked to see the original documents that established this debt, Robert's response was swift and brutal. You have no legal standing to review these documents, Rose. As the executor of Dad's estate, I have sole authority over all financial matters. And frankly, given your obvious confusion and emotional instability regarding this situation, I think it's best if you limit your involvement to what's absolutely necessary. He then did something that I never could have imagined in my worst nightmares. He called security, actual security guards that he had apparently arranged to have waiting outside, and had them escort me off the property that had been my family home for my entire life. It's all my property now, Rose, he said as I was being led toward the door, a triumphant gleam in his eyes that I had never seen before. You have no claim here anymore. Don't cause trouble by trying to come back without permission. As I stood on the sidewalk outside the house, where I had taken my first steps and celebrated countless holidays, watching strangers prevent me from entering my own family's home, I felt something fundamental break inside my chest. This wasn't just about money or inheritance anymore. This was about the complete destruction of everything I had believed about family loyalty, honest communication, and the basic human decency that should exist between people who share the same blood. But even as my heart was breaking, my mind was beginning to work with the analytical precision that had served me well throughout my career. There were too many inconsistencies in Robert's story, too many convenient explanations that didn't align with the parents I had known and loved. The archivist in me recognized the signs of a carefully constructed deception, and I was going to find the truth no matter what it cost me. The days following my humiliating expulsion from my family home were filled with a kind of isolation I had never experienced before. Robert and Brenda's campaign against me escalated from private family drama to public character assassination, and I watched in horror as they systematically destroyed not just my reputation, but my parents' memory as well. Robert began giving interviews to local financial newsletters and estate planning organizations, positioning himself as a cautionary tale about the importance of proper financial oversight in family businesses. Without ever mentioning my name directly, he painted a picture of a family torn apart by one member's inability to accept the financial realities left behind by poor business decisions and inadequate planning. Sometimes, he told a reporter from the regional business journal, elderly family members become fixated on idealized versions of the past that simply don't align with documented financial facts. It's tragic when sentiment interferes with the practical necessity of resolving legitimate business debts. Brenda took a different but equally devastating approach. She began posting carefully curated family updates on social media, showcasing their suddenly lavish lifestyle with subtle hints about Robert's wisdom in properly managing his fair share of the family assets. Photos of expensive vacations, renovations to their home, and luxury purchases appeared regularly, each one accompanied by captions about moving forward from family drama and focusing on positive financial decisions. The most painful posts were the ones that included pictures of my parents, images from family gatherings that I had taken and shared in happier times, now repurposed to support a narrative that painted them as financially irresponsible and me as a bitter old woman who couldn't accept reality. But it was during one of Brenda's phone conversations that I discovered the true depth of their callousness. I had come to the house hoping to retrieve some of my mother's personal items that held sentimental value, and while waiting on the porch for someone to answer the door, I overheard Brenda talking to someone inside. Her voice was cold and calculating, devoid of any warmth or family feeling. The old lady is costing us a fortune with all her demands and questions. All this caring about family history nonsense is just an excuse for her to interfere with our plans. She's a burden we need to shed as quickly as possible. Once her house is sold to pay off the debt, we'll be free to move forward without her constant interference. The chilling clarity of that moment was overwhelming. Brenda wasn't just supporting Robert's financial decisions. She was actively viewing my parents' entire legacy as her personal windfall, and my pain as nothing more than a minor inconvenience to be eliminated. When the door finally opened and I asked about retrieving my mother's jewelry box, a small wooden container that held her wedding ring and a few modest pieces with enormous sentimental value, Robert's response was swift and brutal. "Those items are part of the estate now, Rose. Everything in this house has to be evaluated for its potential contribution to debt resolution. I can't allow you to remove assets that might be needed to satisfy Dad's obligations." Standing on that porch, being denied access to my mother's wedding ring by my own brother, I felt the last vestiges of hope for our family relationship crumble away. But it also awakened something fierce and protective in my chest, a recognition that if I didn't fight for the truth, my parents' memory would be forever tainted by lies designed to justify theft. It was during this dark period that a memory I had buried for over 15 years began to surface, triggered by the stress and the constant feeling that everything I thought I knew about my family was being turned upside down. The memory involved a secret I had kept to protect my parents' reputation, a sacrifice that now seemed to have enabled the very betrayal I was experiencing. My father, Arthur, in his final years, had indeed faced significant financial challenges, not from failed business ventures or poor investment decisions, but from a series of medical emergencies and experimental treatments for my mother's early-stage cancer that insurance refused to cover. The treatments had ultimately been successful, extending my mother's life by nearly 2 decades, but the cost had been devastating to their retirement savings. In his desperation to ensure that Robert and I would still receive some inheritance despite these medical expenses, my father had made a decision that haunted me still. Working with my mother, who was equally determined to protect her children's future, he had created a modified version of their will that secured certain liquid assets before the full extent of their medical debt became apparent to creditors. I had discovered this years later during my work organizing their personal papers after my mother's death. My expertise in document analysis had revealed the subtle alterations and additions that my father had made, changes that were technically fraudulent but motivated by nothing more than parental love and desperation. Rather than expose this secret and taint my parents' memory, I had carefully concealed the evidence, ensuring that their reputation for integrity remained untarnished. I had spent thousands of dollars of my own money consulting with lawyers and financial experts to ensure that no legal consequences would ever emerge from my father's desperate act of love. The cosmic irony was unbearable. My father's genuine attempt to protect his children's inheritance had been twisted by Robert into justification for stealing my legitimate share of their estate. My act of love in protecting their reputation had made me vulnerable to exploitation by the very family members my parents had tried to provide for. When I tried to subtly reference my parents' hidden struggles during one of our increasingly hostile conversations, hoping to make Robert understand the true context of our family's financial situation, his response was like a knife to my heart. "Rose, you're always trying to control Dad's story, even now that he's been dead for 20 years. He snapped, his voice filled with contempt. "Just let it go. This is about money and legal obligations, not your fantasies about what Dad intended or what Mom sacrificed. You're living in the past." Brenda's addition was even more cruel. "Honestly, Rose, you're getting quite paranoid with all these theories about hidden meanings and secret intentions. We're genuinely concerned about your mental health. You seem to be losing your grip on reality." When Mark sent me a text message that evening, his words completed the circle of betrayal. "Mom, Uncle Robert says you've always made up dramatic stories to get attention. Maybe it's time to accept that Grandpa and Grandma weren't the perfect people you pretend they were." The final insult came when Robert called to offer what he characterized as a generous resolution to our family conflict. Speaking in the tone of voice normally reserved for dealing with difficult children, he outlined his proposal. "I'm willing to provide you with a small monthly stipend, Rose, $500 a month, which is more than generous considering the family's current financial obligations. But this offer comes with conditions. You'll need to sign a document stating that you accept the current estate distribution as final and complete, and you'll need to publicly retract any claims of fraud or financial impropriety." The offer was stunning in its audacity. Robert was proposing to give me $500 a month of what was rightfully my own inheritance in exchange for my silence about what was clearly a massive theft. He was literally asking me to pay for the privilege of being robbed by my own family. "This is a fair offer, Rose," he continued, apparently oblivious to the profound insult he was delivering. "It ensures that you'll have some income to cover your basic needs while allowing the rest of the family to move forward without the constant drama and accusations you've been creating." As I hung up the phone that night, I realized that the choice before me was stark and terrible. I could accept Robert's humiliating offer and spend my remaining years as a pensioner dependent on the charity of people who had stolen my inheritance, or I could fight back with everything I had, knowing that the battle would likely destroy whatever remained of my family relationships. The decision, when it came, was surprisingly easy. Some principles are worth more than peace, and some truths are too important to remain buried. My parents had sacrificed everything to protect their children's futures, and I was not going to let their memory be destroyed by lies designed to justify greed. The legal document that would formalize my banishment from my own family arrived on a gray October morning, delivered by certified mail, with all the bureaucratic efficiency designed to make me feel like a criminal rather than a victim of fraud. The letterhead belonged to Mr. Davies, an attorney I had never heard of, and the language was clinical and devastating. "Dear Mrs. Rose Thompson." It began using my formal name as if I were a stranger rather than a sister and mother who had been part of this family for 68 years. After careful consideration and extensive consultation with our clients, we are formally notifying you that a temporary restraining order has been issued effective immediately. The legal language that followed was designed to be as humiliating as possible. Robert had filed a petition claiming that I was engaging in harassment and erratic behavior related to the inheritance dispute, that my increasingly unstable demands were causing emotional distress to family members, and that legal intervention was necessary to protect them from my obsessive pursuit of unfounded financial claims. Most devastating of all, the restraining order didn't just prohibit me from contacting Robert and Brenda. It included my own children, Mark and Lisa, and even my grandchildren, Sarah and David. Any violation would result in immediate arrest and prosecution. The letter concluded with a paragraph that was clearly meant to destroy any remaining hope I might have harbored. Our clients have made this difficult decision solely to protect their families from ongoing emotional abuse and financial manipulation. I read those words over and over, each repetition driving the knife deeper into my heart. My own family had characterized my love for them and my fight for our parents' true wishes as emotional abuse, my quest for honesty as financial manipulation that required legal intervention to stop. But I wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. The archivist in me understood that sometimes the most powerful evidence isn't found in legal documents or financial records, but in the personal artifacts that capture the true nature of relationships and reveal the authentic history that others might want to erase. I spent hours creating a small, intimate album that told the story of our family's real history. Pictures of Mark and Lisa as children playing in their grandparents' garden and learning life lessons from parents who had always emphasized honesty and integrity. Photos of family holidays where Arthur and Eleanor had presided over celebrations that emphasized love sharing and mutual respect. Images of Robert and me as young adults working together to care for aging parents who had trusted us both to honor their values and preserve their legacy. Each photograph was a piece of evidence that contradicted the narrative of greed and manipulation that Robert was trying to construct. These were images of genuine love, authentic family bonds, and shared values that had once united us in something larger than individual self-interest. I wrote a letter to accompany the album, pouring my heart onto the pages in handwriting that shook with emotion and desperate hope. I reminded Mark and Lisa of the grandparents who had taught them about fairness and justice, who had saved money for their college educations and taken pride in their accomplishments. I spoke about the uncle who had once been my closest ally and dearest friend before greed and manipulation had transformed him into someone I barely recognized. My dearest Mark and Lisa. I wrote, I know that things are confusing right now, and I know that the adults in your life are telling you different stories about who I am and what I'm fighting for. But I want you to look at these pictures and remember the truth of our family's history. Remember the grandmother who taught you that honesty was more important than money, and the grandfather who showed you that integrity couldn't be bought or sold. Late one evening, I drove to Mark's house and left the album on his doorstep, hoping that when he saw those captured moments of genuine family love, something in his heart might remember the values that had once made us a real family, rather than just people who shared the same last name. For 3 days, I allowed myself to hope that my gesture might reach whatever love remained in my children's hearts. I imagined Mark looking through the photos and remembering the grandfather who had taught him to value truth above convenience, Lisa recognizing the family bonds that had once been built on mutual respect rather than financial calculation. Then I saw Brenda's social media post, and my world collapsed completely. The photograph showed my carefully crafted album soaked and discarded in a muddy puddle, its pages scattered and destroyed by rain and neglect. The photos I had chosen so carefully, images of Mark's childhood, wonder of Lisa's pride in her grandparents' approval, of family moments when love had been the only currency that mattered, had been deliberately destroyed and abandoned like worthless trash. The caption read, "Cleaning out the clutter." Some people just can't let go of the past and keep trying to manipulate family members with old photos and guilt trips. Time to move forward from negativity and desperate attempts to control others. Healthy boundaries. Check family first, moving on. Seeing those irreplaceable memories, those moments of pure love and authentic connection destroyed and thrown away like garbage was more than my heart could bear. I collapsed onto my kitchen floor, sobbing uncontrollably as the full weight of their cruelty crashed over me. The realization that my own son had not only permitted but actively participated in this ultimate act of erasure was devastating beyond words. Robert's response was swift and merciless. Within hours of Brenda's post, my phone buzzed with a text message that was crueler than anything he had ever said directly. "Consider this closed, Rose. Don't contact me or my family again. Ever. You lose. Some people never learn when to give up." But even that wasn't enough for them. Brenda began calling our mutual friends and distant relatives, spreading a carefully crafted narrative that painted me as mentally unstable and dangerously fixated on money that didn't belong to me. She spoke with the practiced concern of someone who had rehearsed this performance many times, expressing her worry about my mental health and her fear that my obsession with the inheritance was driving me toward dangerous behavior. The cruelest blow of all came in a text message from Mark that arrived just as I was beginning to process the destruction of the photo album. "Mom, you're acting completely crazy. Uncle Robert is right about you needing help. Why don't you just give up and leave us alone? Maybe you should just die already and stop causing problems for everyone." The casual cruelty of those words coming from the mouth of a son I had loved unconditionally since the moment he was born was almost unbearable. But it also crystallized something important for me. This wasn't just about money or inheritance or even family relationships. This was about something much darker, a systematic campaign to erase me from my family's life and rewrite our entire history to justify theft and betrayal. It was then, in my deepest despair, that I finally revealed the most devastating secret of my past to Judge Patricia Williams, the retired chief probate judge who had become my legal advisor and emotional anchor during this nightmare. The weight of keeping this burden alone had become unbearable, and her compassionate professional presence finally gave me the courage to speak the truth I had hidden for over 15 years. There's something about my father's financial situation that makes Robert's theft even more heartbreaking. I began my voice barely above a whisper. Something I've never told anyone, something I promised myself I would take to my grave to protect my parents' reputation. Judge Williams waited patiently as I gathered the courage to continue her gentle presence, giving me the strength to finally break the silence that had protected my family's honor for so long. My father did make changes to their will in his final years, but not for the reasons Robert claims. Dad was facing crippling medical expenses from my mother's cancer treatments, experimental procedures that insurance wouldn't cover, but that ultimately saved her life and gave us 20 more years with her. The words came out in a rush, decades of suppressed guilt and protective instinct finally finding voice. To ensure that Robert and I would still receive some inheritance despite these medical costs, Dad worked with Mom to modify their will securing certain liquid assets before the full extent of their medical debt became apparent to creditors. It wasn't fraud for personal gain. It was a desperate parent's attempt to protect his children's future. Judge Williams' face remained carefully neutral, but I could see the understanding dawning in her eyes as the full implications of what I was telling her became clear. I discovered this years later when I was organizing their papers after Mom died. I continued, tears streaming down my face. My expertise in document analysis revealed what Dad had done, and instead of exposing it, I spent thousands of my own dollars consulting with lawyers to ensure that no legal consequences would ever emerge from his act of desperate love. I told her about the months I had spent carefully concealing the evidence, the sleepless nights I had endured, wondering if I was making the right choice, the enormous personal cost of protecting my parents' reputation at the expense of complete honesty. I sacrificed my own peace of mind and my commitment to absolute truth to preserve their memory as people of integrity, I whispered. And now Robert is using my father's memory to justify stealing what legitimately belongs to me, twisting Dad's desperate love into evidence of dishonesty and poor judgment. The cosmic irony was unbearable. My father's genuine attempt to protect his children had been perverted into justification for one child to steal from the other. My act of love in protecting their reputation had made me vulnerable to exploitation by the very family members they had tried to provide for. The silence in Judge Williams's office was profound as the weight of my confession settled between us. I had protected my parents from the consequences of their desperate choices, only to watch my brother use their memory as a weapon against me. My deepest act of filial love had been turned into the foundation for my own destruction. The betrayal was complete, the irony devastating, and the price of my protective love higher than I had ever imagined it could be. But for the first time in months, I also felt something else, a cold, determined clarity about what needed to happen next. Some secrets are too heavy to carry alone. Some truths are too important to remain buried. And some fights for family honor and personal dignity are worth having no matter what they cost or who gets hurt in the process. The real battle for my family's integrity was about to begin. In the weeks that followed the restraining order and the revelation of my devastating secret to Judge Williams, I found myself trapped in a psychological prison more terrifying than any physical confinement I could have imagined. The weight of my parents' hidden struggles combined with the legal prohibition against contacting my own family created a suffocating isolation that pressed down on me like a living nightmare. Every morning I would wake up in my small apartment and remember anew that I was utterly alone with the truth. The monumental secret of what I had done to protect my parents' reputation burned inside me like acid eating away at my sense of reality and purpose. For 40 years, I had been a guardian of legal truth, someone who verified documents and preserved authentic records for others to rely upon. Now, I was drowning in the most profound moral crisis of my life, questioning every choice I had made and wondering if my love had somehow enabled the very betrayal I was experiencing. The isolation was made infinitely worse by Mr. Davies and Brenda's systematic campaign to destroy not just my family relationships, but my entire professional legacy as well. What I didn't realize at first was how methodically they were working to obliterate every aspect of my identity and credibility. Mr. Davies began what he called a wellness inquiry regarding my mental state, subtly contacting local notary public associations and court administration offices with carefully crafted concerns about my declining cognitive abilities. He painted a picture of a once respected archivist who was now experiencing severe mental deterioration, someone who had developed unstable fantasies about legal history and was no longer capable of distinguishing between documented facts and personal wishful thinking. Rose Thompson has been exhibiting increasingly problematic behavior, he would say in his professional concerned tone. Her family has been forced to seek legal protection due to her obsessive fixation on rewriting established legal documents and financial records. There are serious questions about her ability to maintain the ethical standards that are essential for public trust in court records and notary services. The impact was swift and devastating. Quietly, without any formal announcement, I began receiving polite but firm notices that my membership in professional organizations was being reviewed. The annual dinner of the Court Records Association, where I had been scheduled to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award, suddenly found scheduling conflicts that made the ceremony impossible. A workshop on document preservation that I had been invited to teach was canceled due to budget constraints. My reputation for meticulous accuracy and calm composure, built over 4 decades of careful work and ethical practice, was being systematically obliterated. Colleagues who had once sought my expertise now avoided my calls. The courthouse where I had worked with distinction for 30 years treated me like a pariah, as if my very presence might contaminate their reputation for professional integrity. The financial consequences were immediate and catastrophic. The escalating legal fees from defending myself against Mr. Hayes's $500,000 debt claim, combined with Robert's countersuit for harassment and defamation, completely drained my modest savings account. When Mark reported concerns about my financial management to protect me from myself, my bank accounts were frozen pending investigation into my supposed mental incompetence. The eviction notice came on a bitter November morning. I stared at the legal document, written in the same cold clinical language as the restraining order, and realized that I was about to lose the last physical connection to my independent life. Within 30 days, my cherished home, filled with decades of carefully preserved family documents and professional archives, would be sold at public auction to cover my legal debts. The day of the auction was the most humiliating experience of my 68 years. I stood across the street watching strangers rifle through my possessions, putting price tags on items that held immeasurable personal and professional value. My notaries seal my filing systems, the thousands of family records that represented years of preserving our heritage and legal history. Everything was reduced to lots and dollar amounts sold to the highest bidder. I ended up in a crowded, impersonal public shelter, sleeping on a narrow cot, surrounded by people whose circumstances had stripped them of dignity, just as mine had been stripped from me. The irony wasn't lost on me that I, who had spent my life preserving legal documents that protected people's rights and property, was now among society's most vulnerable and forgotten. But the cruelest blow was yet to come, and it involved the 2 people I loved most in the world, my grandchildren, Tom and Emily. Mark and Lisa, with Brenda's calculating guidance, decided to leverage my grandchildren in what they called a family legacy preservation campaign. They connected with a well-funded foundation that promoted responsible estate management and protecting family assets from frivolous claims. I learned about it the same way the rest of the world did, through a professionally produced video that went viral on social media. The setting was elegant and authoritative, with rich wood paneling and legal books that made the speakers appear trustworthy and knowledgeable. Tom, now 16, and looking heartbreakingly like his grandfather, Arthur stood beside a display about estate planning and delivered a rehearsed speech about honoring true family wishes. Sometimes he said, looking directly into the camera with my father's eyes. We have to protect our family's legacy from people who put their own desires above what our ancestors actually wanted. Sometimes the most respectful thing we can do is accept that our assumptions about inheritance might be wrong and trust the adults who were actually chosen to manage these important decisions. The words were clearly not his own, but hearing them in his voice, seeing him used as a spokesperson to legitimize his family's theft from me, shattered something fundamental inside me. Emily's contribution was even more devastating in its calculated innocence. The 14-year-old I had taught to appreciate history and document preservation stood beside a drawing she had made of a happy, responsible family. The picture showed Mark, Lisa, Robert, Brenda, Tom, and herself all standing around a table covered with legal documents, looking serious and trustworthy. I was nowhere to be found. This is what family responsibility looks like, she said, her voice sweet and confident. When everyone works together to honor what our grandparents really wanted instead of fighting over things that were never meant for us. The video ended with a message about the importance of estate integrity and the courage required to resist greedy relatives who try to overturn legitimate family decisions. My own grandchildren had been turned into weapons against me, their innocent faces used to legitimize a narrative that painted my fight for justice as selfish greed. I spent that night on my narrow shelter cot, staring at the ceiling and wondering if this was how people lost their minds. The psychological torture of being legally separated from my family while watching them use my most precious relationships against me was almost unbearable. But just when I thought I had reached the bottom of despair, an unexpected lifeline appeared. The letter arrived at the shelter forwarded from my old address. It was from Catherine Morrison, a young woman I had mentored nearly 25 years ago when she was a trainee in the court records office. She was now a respected court administrator, and she had seen news coverage of my legal troubles. Ms. Thompson. She wrote, I don't understand all the details of what's happening with your family situation, but I know your character and your professional integrity. The woman who taught me that preserving truth in legal documents was a sacred trust, who showed me how to see patterns and inconsistencies that others missed, could never be the person they're describing in the media. She included a check for $15,000 and the contact information for a network of retired legal professionals who specialized in complex estate fraud and family manipulation cases. These people understand how legal systems can be weaponized against the innocent, she wrote. Let them help you fight for the truth you taught me to value above everything else. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of the fierce determination that had carried me through 40 years of meticulous work and ethical challenges. I was not going to let Robert's lies destroy everything I had worked for, everything I believed in, everything that made my parents' sacrifices meaningful. The war was far from over, but I finally had allies who understood what was really at stake. This wasn't just about family relationships or inheritance disputes. This was about the fundamental question of whether truth and authentic documentation could survive when confronted by organized deception and systematic manipulation of legal processes. The next phase of Robert and Brenda's campaign against me was so audacious, so perfectly calculated to destroy everything I held sacred that I might have admired its thoroughness if it hadn't been aimed at obliterating my life's work and professional legacy. Using Robert's position as a successful businessman and Brenda's extensive social connections, they orchestrated something truly diabolical, a highly publicized national seminar called Estate Integrity and Avoiding Fraud, protecting family assets from frivolous claims. The event was scheduled to take place at the very conference center where I had attended professional development seminars for decades, in the space where I had celebrated countless achievements in legal documentation and record preservation. The seminar claimed to address the growing problem of estate manipulation by elderly relatives who might be suffering from cognitive decline or unrealistic expectations about inheritance rights. Robert was announced as the keynote speaker, billed as a case study expert who had successfully protected his family's legitimate estate from baseless legal challenges. When Catherine learned about the seminar through her contacts in the legal community, I felt physically ill. Robert and Brenda were using my own professional arena, my own area of expertise as the stage for my public execution. They were turning the very legal community where I had built my reputation into a platform for promoting the opposite of everything I had ever stood for. I managed to watch the live stream from a computer at the public library, sitting in a corner where the other patrons couldn't see the tears streaming down my face. Robert took the stage, looking distinguished and authoritative, wearing a business suit that made him appear both successful and trustworthy. His presentation was a masterpiece of manipulation. Without ever mentioning my name directly, he told the story of an elderly court records professional whose obsession with outdated documentation methods had made it impossible for her to accept the legitimate decisions made by appointed estate executors. He described how this woman's beautiful but impractical attachment to historical accuracy had nearly destroyed a family's ability to honor their deceased parents' actual wishes. Sometimes, Robert said, his voice carrying the perfect tone of sad wisdom, our professional training becomes a liability rather than an asset. We become so attached to complicated record-keeping systems and elaborate documentation procedures that we lose sight of the practical realities of modern estate management. This particular case study shows how dangerous it can be when someone confuses procedural expertise with actual legal authority. The audience of estate attorneys, financial planners, and court administrators nodded knowingly. Here was a man who understood the real world, who could see past the bureaucratic complications that trapped lesser minds. But the knife twisted deeper when Brenda took the stage for a panel discussion on family dynamics in estate disputes. She spoke about me with the practiced sympathy of someone who had rehearsed this performance many times. It's heartbreaking to watch someone you care about become increasingly disconnected from current legal practices, she said, her voice heavy with false concern. Rose's record-keeping methods were always thorough, but as she's gotten older, they've become more and more about hiding inconvenient truths rather than preserving authentic documentation. She simply cannot accept that modern estate management requires clear, straightforward legal instruments rather than the overly complex archival systems she prefers. The moderator asked gentle, leading questions about the challenges of dealing with elderly relatives who might be experiencing professional rigidity combined with cognitive decline. Brenda painted a picture of a family torn apart by one person's inability to adapt to contemporary legal standards and accept legitimate executor decisions. But the most devastating moment came when they showed a pre-recorded video featuring Tom, now 16, and clearly uncomfortable, but going through with his scripted lines anyway. My beloved grandson, the boy whose interest in family history I had carefully nurtured, spoke about his growing understanding of financial transparency and the importance of moving beyond secretive family dealings. My grandmother taught me about preserving documents, he said, his voice carefully neutral. but I've learned that sometimes old records can be used to confuse rather than clarify legal situations. Real transparency means trusting the people who have been legally appointed to manage family assets, not trying to second-guess their decisions with complicated historical research. The implicit message was clear. Rose's expertise in document preservation was outdated academic pedantry disconnected from the practical realities of effective estate management. Even her own grandson had outgrown her antiquated approach to legal documentation. The final twist of the knife came in a short video clip featuring Emily, now 14, and giggling as she pointed at one of my old court records manuals. "Grandma used to read these huge, boring books all the time," she said, laughing. "So old-fashioned, we prefer digital ledgers and simple spreadsheets now." The audience chuckled appreciatively. Here was the next generation freed from the cumbersome methods that had trapped their elder, ready to embrace more efficient approaches to legal record keeping. I sat in that library chair, watching my life's work being systematically dismantled and used as a cautionary tale about the dangers of professional inflexibility. The irony was unbearable. Robert, a man whose entire case was built on fraudulent manipulation of legal documents, was being celebrated as an expert in estate integrity. But just as I was about to close the laptop and flee from this nightmare, something unexpected happened. The camera panned across the audience, and I caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd, Judge Michael Harrison, a retired chief probate judge who had worked closely with me on dozens of complex estate cases over the years. Judge Harrison looked disgusted. His face showed the same expression of revulsion I remembered from court sessions when someone would attempt to present fraudulent documents or manipulate legal procedures for personal gain. He was shaking his head clearly, seeing through the elaborate performance being staged on that platform. After the seminar ended, I received an email that gave me the first real hope I had felt in weeks. Judge Harrison had tracked down my contact information through Catherine and reached out to express his outrage at what he had witnessed. "Rose," he wrote, "what I saw today was an abomination. Whoever orchestrated that seminar has turned legal education into a weapon against truth and professional integrity. I don't know the details of your family situation, but I know your work, and I know when I'm watching a fraud being dressed up as legal scholarship." He offered something precious, a professional affidavit, vouching for my impeccable ethical judgment and mental acuity based on decades of professional collaboration. More importantly, he put me in touch with Catherine's network of retired legal professionals, sharing his suspicions that something much more serious was happening behind the scenes. Judge Harrison had been quietly investigating the legal structure of Robert's estate management, and what he had discovered was disturbing. Robert wasn't just stealing from me. He had been systematically manipulating estate documents and legal procedures in ways that suggested a pattern of fraud extending far beyond our family situation. "Your brother isn't just betraying you personally, Rose," he wrote. "He's using sophisticated legal manipulation techniques that suggest experience with this kind of fraud. This isn't about family dynamics anymore. This is about whether the legal system itself can be corrupted by people who understand how to weaponize legitimate procedures against innocent victims. The fight for my principles, my reputation, and my family's integrity had just gained a powerful new dimension. The truth was finally beginning to find champions who could help me expose the elaborate network of lies and legal manipulation that had consumed my life. The final financial assault came with the precision of a military operation coordinated across multiple fronts to ensure my complete destruction. Robert, with Brenda's full support, and Mr. Davies's legal expertise launched what he called his comprehensive resolution, a devastating legal and financial attack designed to render me not just homeless, but utterly powerless to continue fighting for the truth. The lawsuit arrived like a thunderbolt so massive in scope that even my battle-hardened legal allies were stunned by its audacity. Robert filed a $750,000 claim against me for emotional distress, intentional damage to family reputation, and malicious interference with estate management stemming from what he characterized as my prolonged campaign of legal harassment against their family's legitimate financial decisions. The legal documents, crafted by Mr. Davies with surgical precision, painted me as a vindictive old woman who had orchestrated a systematic campaign of professional manipulation against her own family. They cited my obsessive fixation on outdated documentation procedures, my delusional insistence on non-existent inheritance rights, and my malicious attempts to use my professional reputation to undermine legitimate legal processes. But the lawsuit was only the beginning. While I was scrambling to find legal representation, I couldn't afford Robert launched a parallel attack on my remaining professional standing and financial security. He contacted my former court administration offices and notary public associations with what he called grave concerns about my mental competence and my fitness to maintain professional credentials. His evidence was compelling to anyone who didn't know the full story. He presented the restraining order as proof of my dangerous instability. He shared carefully edited recordings of our conversations that made my desperate pleas for honest documentation sound like the rambling threats of an unhinged person. He even provided testimony from Mark and Lisa about their growing concerns over my increasingly paranoid behavior and my inability to distinguish between professional documentation and personal fantasy. Rose Thompson has become fixated on the idea that her archival expertise gives her authority over legal decisions that are outside her jurisdiction. Robert told the Professional Review Board, "She's lost the ability to maintain appropriate professional boundaries, and our family is genuinely concerned about her capacity to handle sensitive legal documentation." The result was swift and devastating. The State Notary Commission, citing concerns about potential liability and maintaining public trust in legal processes, voted to permanently revoke my professional credentials. They characterized their decision as protecting the integrity of the legal system from someone who had been determined to be a threat to her own family and whose professional judgment had been called into serious question. My pension benefits, accumulated over 4 decades of distinguished service, were stripped away under a clause about conduct inconsistent with professional standards. The Court Records Association, that had been planning to honor my lifetime achievements, suddenly found ethical concerns that made recognition impossible. Within 4 months, I went from having a modest but secure retirement income to being completely destitute. The legal fees from defending against Robert's massive lawsuit consumed the emergency fund Catherine had helped me establish. The loss of my pension eliminated any hope of long-term financial stability. The eviction from my temporary shelter accommodation came on a frigid December morning, timed with cruel precision to ensure maximum humiliation. Brenda had somehow arranged for local media to be present, ostensibly covering a story about housing challenges for seniors with legal difficulties. The footage that aired on the evening news showed me standing on the sidewalk with my few remaining possessions in garbage bags, a formerly respected professional reduced to visible homelessness. The reporter's voiceover was devastating. This is Rose Thompson, a retired court records professional whose family disputes and legal troubles have led to housing instability. Local social services are working to provide support for seniors who may be struggling with the complex challenges of estate disputes and financial management. I watched myself on that television screen, standing in the cold, with everything I owned in trash bags, and barely recognized the broken woman I had become. The dignified professional who had once been trusted with the most sensitive legal documents had been transformed into a cautionary tale about what happens when elderly people become obsessed with inheritance disputes. Mark and Lisa's response to my homelessness was perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire ordeal. When reporters asked Mark about his mother's situation, he delivered a statement that Brenda had clearly crafted for maximum impact. "My mother is struggling with some difficult personal and legal issues right now," he said, his voice heavy with practiced sadness. "We've tried to help her understand that her professional training doesn't give her special authority over family financial decisions, but sometimes you have to accept that you can't change someone's perspective. I have no legal or moral obligation to support someone who refuses to acknowledge the legitimate decisions made by appointed estate executors." Lisa's response was even more calculated in its cruelty. She posted on social media about her incredibly busy schedule with work and family obligations, subtly implying that my problems were self-created drama that she simply didn't have time to deal with. When she encountered me on the street near the shelter, she literally looked away and crossed to the other side, unable or unwilling to face the suffering she had helped create. But the cruelest twist of all came when Brenda decided to celebrate their victory with a gesture so audacious that it took my breath away. Using money that she and Robert had derived from what should have been my share of the inheritance, funds that had been redirected through complex legal maneuvers, she made a highly publicized purchase of an elaborate legal library for Robert's home office. The dedication ceremony was covered by local media as a heartwarming story of successful professionals investing in legal education. Brenda stood beside shelves of expensive law books and state-of-the-art document management equipment, smiling for cameras as she spoke about the importance of modern approaches to estate management and moving beyond outdated record-keeping methods. "This library will help Robert provide even better service to families dealing with complex estate issues," she announced. "Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is invest in current legal knowledge rather than clinging to historical procedures that no longer serve anyone's best interests." The photographs were shared widely on social media, transforming my stolen legacy into a trophy celebrating their professional expertise and family responsibility. They had taken my inheritance, used it to destroy my reputation, and then turned it into a monument to their own supposed integrity. The physical toll of this relentless assault finally overwhelmed my body's ability to cope. One morning in late December, as I was walking from the shelter to the library where I spent my days researching legal options I couldn't afford to pursue, my chest exploded with pain and the world went black. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital intensive care unit connected to machines that were apparently keeping me alive. The doctor, a kind woman about Lisa's age, explained that I had suffered a massive heart attack brought on by severe stress and malnutrition. My body, she said gently, had simply reached its breaking point. As I lay there in that hospital bed floating in and out of consciousness, I experienced something that felt like a vivid dream, but somehow more real than my waking life. I was back in my courthouse office 20 years earlier, working on a complex estate case that had involved a family's attempt to cover up massive financial fraud through document manipulation and legal technicalities. In the dream, I was examining documents that revealed how a son had systematically stolen from his father's estate using sophisticated legal maneuvers to make the theft appear legitimate. The parallels to my own situation were so exact that it felt like my subconscious was trying to tell me something crucial about patterns of fraud and the way legal systems could be manipulated by people who understood their weaknesses. When I fully regained consciousness, I understood with crystalline clarity what my mind was trying to tell me. This entire nightmare, this systematic destruction of my family and my life, followed the exact same pattern as cases I had helped expose decades earlier. Robert wasn't just stealing from me. He was using sophisticated fraud techniques that suggested experience and planning that went far beyond simple family greed. The memory of that case ignited something fierce and unbreakable in my chest, something that the heart attack couldn't touch. I was going to fight back, not just for my own vindication or my family's honor, but for the principles of legal integrity that I had spent my entire career upholding. From my hospital bed, slowly recovering from the heart attack that had nearly ended my fight before it truly began, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced in months. The machines monitoring my vital signs beeped steadily as I dictated what I knew might be my final message to the world. With the help of Margaret Santos, the compassionate nurse who had become my unlikely ally, I recorded a video that contained everything I had been legally prohibited from saying. In that raw emotional recording, I didn't make accusations or demands. Instead, I simply told the truth about my lifelong dedication to preserving documented evidence and upholding legal integrity. I spoke about my unconditional love for my family and my profound sadness at watching them choose deception over honesty, manipulation over authentic relationships. Most importantly, I played the unedited audio recordings I had secretly made during our family meetings, conversations that revealed the true nature of what was happening. Mark's voice filled the quiet hospital room as he explicitly blamed me for creating problems where none existed. "Mom, you're always making everything complicated with your records and your procedures. Why can't you just accept that Uncle Robert knows what he's doing?" Lisa's words were equally damning. "Honestly, Mother, your obsession with documentation is embarrassing. Normal families don't need all these papers and archives to make simple decisions about money." But the most powerful evidence was a voicemail my mother had left on my phone just months before her death, a recording I had preserved but never fully understood until now. Eleanor's voice, weak but determined, spoke about her deep guilt over the financial situation she and Arthur had left behind. "Rose, dear, I need you to know that your father never intended for these debts to hurt you and Robert. We tried so hard to protect you both, but I'm afraid we may have made things worse. If anything happens to me, please make sure the truth comes out about what we really wanted for our children." The message was heartbreaking in its simplicity and devastating in its implications. My mother had been worried about exactly what was now happening, that her attempts to protect her children would be twisted into justification for one child to harm the other. "Mark, Lisa," I said, looking directly into the camera with whatever strength I had left. "I know you're listening to other voices now, but somewhere inside you, you know the truth about who I am and what I've always stood for. You know your grandmother's voice when you hear it, and you know she would never have wanted our family to be destroyed by lies and greed." Margaret Santos, who had watched the entire recording with tears in her eyes, promised to personally deliver the message to Mark and Lisa's homes. She was as invested in seeing justice done as I was, having witnessed firsthand the cruel campaign that had nearly killed me. But what we didn't know was that Brenda had systematically bribed several staff members at the hospital to monitor my communications and report back to her about my condition and activities. The orderly who was supposed to deliver my message instead handed it directly to Brenda, who intercepted it before Mark and Lisa could ever see the full recording. What happened next was so coldly calculated, so perfectly evil in its sophistication, that it took my breath away, even after everything I had already endured. Brenda didn't simply destroy the recording. Instead, she took my raw emotional appeal for truth and twisted it into the final weapon against me. Using sophisticated digital editing software, she carefully manipulated the audio and video, altering the tone of my voice, splicing sentences together out of context, and adding ominous background noise that made my desperate appeals sound like the paranoid ravings of an unhinged mind. She cut my heartfelt reminders of family values and my mother's words in such a way that they sounded like threats and manipulation attempts. She altered the audio of my recordings to make them sound like me rehearsing fictional scenarios designed to frame innocent people. Most devastating of all, she edited my direct appeal to Mark and Lisa's conscience to make it sound like I was trying to manipulate them with false guilt and emotional blackmail. The doctored video was then sold to a prominent national news channel for a substantial sum, framed as exclusive footage that provided disturbing proof of my mental deterioration following my heart attack. The story ran with the headline, "Retired Court Workers Delusional Hospital, Rants Reveal Dangerous Family Obsession." The edited version painted me as a dying woman consumed by paranoid delusions, desperately trying to blackmail her own children and defame her deceased parents' memory, with elaborate conspiracy theories about inheritance fraud and document manipulation. The network's expert commentator, a psychologist who had never met me, analyzed my obvious signs of cognitive decline and my textbook pattern of elder paranoia combined with professional delusion. When Mark and Lisa appeared on national television the next day for what was billed as an exclusive interview about dealing with a parent's mental illness, my heart shattered completely. My children, the people I had raised to value truth above convenience, sat in a professional studio and delivered a performance that Brenda had clearly orchestrated with surgical precision. This is incredibly difficult for our family. Mark said, his voice heavy with what appeared to be genuine emotion. Our mother was once a respected professional, someone who taught us so much about the importance of accurate documentation and legal integrity. But watching her deteriorate like this, seeing her become consumed by these paranoid fantasies about inheritance fraud and family conspiracies, has been heartbreaking. Lisa nodded along, adding her own devastating commentary. We just want her to find peace, but her accusations and demands are hurting everyone in the family. She seems to believe that her professional background gives her special authority over legal decisions that were made by properly appointed estate executors. The most devastating moment came when Tom and Emily, now 16 and 14, appeared on camera, looking sad and worried. My beloved grandchildren, clearly coached, but probably believing they were doing the right thing, spoke about how much they love me, but how frightening it had become to watch my mental state deteriorate. We miss our grandmother. Tom said, his voice carefully modulated to sound both loving and concerned. But she's not herself anymore. We hope she can get the help she needs so we can have our real grandma back. Emily's contribution was even more painful. It's really scary when someone you love starts believing things that aren't true. We just want her to be happy and healthy again. The viral video and the television interviews created a perfect storm of public humiliation that reached millions of people. Social media exploded with commentary about the crazy court worker who was tormenting her own family with legal delusions. The story became a cautionary tale about what happens when professional expertise becomes dangerous obsession in elderly minds. But in my darkest hour, when it seemed that Brenda's manipulation had succeeded beyond even her wildest dreams, an unexpected champion emerged from the shadows. Judge Harrison, who had been quietly investigating the situation since the estate integrity seminar, had been carefully analyzing the viral video with the same methodical approach he had once applied to complex legal cases. His decades of experience with document fraud and his intimate knowledge of my character had led him to some disturbing conclusions. Working with a team of technical experts, he had discovered irrefutable proof of the digital manipulation that had transformed my desperate plea for truth into evidence of my supposed mental illness. The metadata, the audio analysis, the video compression artifacts, everything pointed to sophisticated editing designed to distort my message beyond recognition. More importantly, his investigation into Robert's estate management practices had uncovered a pattern of legal manipulation that extended far beyond my family's situation. Robert wasn't just stealing from his own relatives. He was systematically defrauding multiple estate beneficiaries using his reputation as a successful businessman and his apparent expertise in estate integrity to gain access to vulnerable families and their legal processes. The evidence Judge Harrison had compiled was substantial enough to interest federal investigators and powerful enough to finally give me the leverage I needed to fight back against the elaborate network of lies and legal manipulation that had consumed my life. As I lay in that hospital bed reading Judge Harrison's preliminary findings on his laptop, I felt something I hadn't experienced in almost a year. Hope. Not just for my own vindication, but for justice itself. The truth was finally beginning to surface, and those who had worked so hard to bury it were about to discover that some things cannot be destroyed, no matter how much power and sophistication you use against them. The real battle was just beginning, and this time I had an army of legal professionals standing behind me. Judge Harrison's evidence proved to be the key that unlocked everything. Within weeks of his preliminary findings reaching the right authorities, I found myself at the center of a legal earthquake that would reshape not only my family's future, but the entire national conversation about elder abuse and inheritance fraud in America. The funding for my legal battle came from an unexpected source, a settlement from a legal malpractice case I had worked on decades earlier that had finally been resolved in favor of the plaintiff. My meticulous documentation and testimony had been crucial to exposing the malpractice, and the grateful attorney had established a trust fund that I had completely forgotten about. The fund had grown to nearly $400,000, more than enough to finance the fight for justice that my situation demanded. My legal team was formidable: Judge Patricia Harrison, my retired chief probate judge ally, Dr. Michael Chen, a forensic accountant with decades of experience in complex fraud cases, and most powerfully, Catherine Morrison, my former trainee, who had become a prominent court administrator with deep connections throughout the legal system. Together, they launched a massive federal civil and criminal lawsuit against Robert Brenda and Mr. Davies for fraud, embezzlement, elder abuse conspiracy, and national defamation. The case attracted global attention almost immediately. Here was a story that resonated with millions of families struggling with inheritance disputes, elder abuse, and the complex dynamics of trust and betrayal within families. Media outlets from around the world sent reporters to cover what was being called the inheritance fraud trial of the decade. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment when the truth finally exploded into the light. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with overflow seating for media and members of the public who had followed my story through the viral videos and international coverage. Cameras rolled as Judge Sarah Mitchell called the session to order, and I felt my heart pounding as Catherine Morrison approached the evidence table. "Your Honor," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom, "we are about to present documentary evidence that will demonstrate beyond any shadow of doubt the calculated nature of the fraud and elder abuse perpetrated against Mrs. Rose Thompson. The first piece of evidence was my mother's meticulously kept ledger, a small leather-bound book that I had discovered hidden in her bedroom closet years after her death. Eleanor had used a simple code that took me months to decipher, but once I understood her system, the entries told a devastating story of financial sacrifice and family love. Page after page detailed every payment she had made to cover Arthur's medical debt, not business failures as Robert claimed. Each entry was dated and included the exact amount, the creditor's name, and heartbreaking notes about her motivation. January 15th, $3,000 to St. Mary's Hospital. Arthur must never know how much this cost us. March 22nd, $5,500 to Dr. Bradley's office. Protecting my children's future is worth everything. The final entries made just weeks before her death were the most devastating. April 3rd, $8,000 final payment to medical debt collectors. Arthur's honor preserved. Rose and Robert will inherit a clean legacy. God forgive me for the deception, but they must never know the price of their father's life. Catherine's voice was steady as she read these entries aloud, but the impact on the courtroom was profound. This wasn't a story of business fraud or poor financial decisions. This was the heartbreaking account of a mother's love and the lengths she would go to protect her children from the burden of medical debt. But the most devastating evidence was yet to come. Catherine activated the audio system, and Robert's voice filled the courtroom with chilling clarity. These were recordings from our family meetings, conversations where Robert had explicitly outlined his plan to manipulate the inheritance situation for his own benefit. "Rose is too sentimental about Mom and Dad's memory," Robert's voice said clearly. "If we can make it look like Dad left massive business debts, she'll feel guilty enough to give up her share to protect the family reputation. She's always been obsessed with preserving their image. We can use that against her." Brenda's voice joined the conversation. "The key is making it look like she's being greedy and unreasonable. If we can get Mark and Lisa on our side, she'll be completely isolated. Nobody will believe a bitter old woman against the whole family." The courtroom fell into stunned silence as the full scope of their conspiracy became clear. This wasn't just about money. It was about psychological manipulation of the cruelest kind, using my love for my parents' memory as a weapon against me. When Robert was called to testify, the man who took the witness stand bore little resemblance to the confident manipulator who had orchestrated this nightmare. Confronted with the undeniable evidence of his own words, with my mother's heartbreaking ledger entries, and with the forensic accounting that proved his claims were completely fabricated, something fundamental broke inside him. "Mr. Thompson," Catherine said calmly, "do you recognize the voice on these recordings discussing how to manipulate your sister's emotional attachment to your parents' reputation?" Robert's hands shook as he gripped the witness stand. I was desperate," he whispered. You don't understand the financial pressure I was under. My business was failing, and I thought if Rose would just share the inheritance equally, everyone would be fine. I never meant for it to become this complicated. So you admit that you fabricated the claims about your father's business debts in order to steal your sister's legitimate inheritance. I never thought she'd fight me on it. Robert's voice broke completely. I thought she'd just accept it and move on. I never thought it would destroy everything. As the weight of his public confession settled over him, Robert suffered what could only be described as a complete psychological collapse. He began sobbing uncontrollably, his body shaking so violently that the bailiff had to steady him in his chair. The sight of my brother, the man who had systematically destroyed my life for over 2 years, reduced to a broken weeping figure, was both vindicating and heartbreaking. Brenda's attempt to flee the courtroom only made her guilt more obvious. She was apprehended in the hallway by court security, her careful composure finally cracking as she realized that her role as the primary architect of this conspiracy had been exposed. The woman who had helped spread lies and coordinate attacks broke down in desperate tears, her social ambitions lying in ruins around her. Mr. Davies, the lawyer who had enabled so much of this fraud, was immediately taken into custody. His disbarment proceedings would begin within days, and criminal charges for conspiracy and obstruction of justice would follow. But the most devastating moment of all came when Mark was called to testify. Hearing his uncle's true voice on those recordings, watching Robert's complete breakdown, and finally confronting the undeniable evidence of his own complicity in my suffering, my son experienced his own profound psychological collapse. "Mom," he whispered, looking directly at me for the first time in over 2 years. "I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. I don't know how I became someone who could participate in destroying you like this. I don't know how I let Uncle Robert convince me that you were the problem instead of seeing what he was doing to all of us." Mark began weeping uncontrollably, his entire body shaking with the force of his realization. "I helped them steal from you," he sobbed. "My own mother and I helped them steal from you because I was too weak to think for myself, too greedy to question why Uncle Robert's story kept changing." Watching my son's public breakdown, seeing him finally understand the magnitude of what had been done to our family was almost unbearable. The vindication I had sought for so long was tempered by the profound sadness of seeing how completely Robert's manipulation had damaged everyone it touched. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of Mark's anguished sobs and the gentle humming of the recording equipment that was capturing every moment of this family's complete unraveling. Justice was finally being served, but the cost was higher than I had ever imagined it could be. The court's verdict came down like the final judgment it truly was. Judge Mitchell's voice carried the weight of absolute moral authority as she delivered her ruling, speaking not just to the defendants before her, but to a nation grappling with questions of elder abuse and family exploitation. This court finds the defendants guilty on all counts of criminal elder abuse, financial fraud conspiracy to commit fraud and defamation, she announced. Mr. Robert Thompson, your systematic campaign of psychological manipulation and your orchestrated theft of your sister's inheritance represent crimes of extraordinary cruelty and premeditation. You are sentenced to 12 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 8 years. Robert, still broken from his courtroom collapse, could barely stand as the sentence was read. The man who had launched this nightmare with such calculated confidence was now facing the reality that his greed had cost him not just his freedom, but his entire future. "Mrs. Brenda Thompson," the judge continued, her voice heavy with disgust, Your role as the primary architect of this conspiracy and your manipulation of vulnerable family relationships represent a particularly heinous form of elder abuse. You are sentenced to 5 years in federal prison with mandatory participation in psychological counseling programs. Brenda's sentencing felt almost anticlimactic after everything she had put me through. The woman who had orchestrated so much of my suffering now faced years of the same isolation and powerlessness she had tried to impose on me. Mr. Davies received 4 years for his role in enabling the fraud and obstruction of justice. His legal career was over, his reputation destroyed, his future defined by the crimes he had committed in service of Robert's greed. But perhaps more important than the prison sentences was Judge Mitchell's formal statement vindicating my character and explicitly dismantling the false narrative that had been constructed around my supposed mental decline and greed. This court wishes to state unequivocally that Mrs. Rose Thompson's character has been completely vindicated, the judge declared. The evidence shows a woman of impeccable integrity and profound dedication to truth who was systematically victimized by those closest to her. The narrative of her mental instability and unreasonable greed was a calculated fabrication designed to facilitate theft and abuse. Mrs. Thompson's lifelong commitment to legal accuracy and family honor is what ultimately brought this conspiracy to light. The formal restoration of my dignity felt almost as important as the financial restitution. For over 2 years, I had been painted as a delusional old woman whose professional judgment had been compromised by age and bitterness. Now the world knew the truth. I had been right all along to fight for my parents' memory and my own inheritance. In the weeks that followed the trial, the letters began arriving. The first came from Robert, written from his prison cell in handwriting that shook with desperation and what appeared to be genuine remorse. Rose, he wrote, I know I have no right to ask for anything from you, but I need you to understand how completely I lost my way. My business was failing. My debts were mounting. And when I saw how much Mom and Dad had left behind, I convinced myself that taking a larger share was justified because I needed it more than you did. He went on to describe the slow progression of lies that had eventually consumed his entire moral compass. It started with just wanting you to accept a smaller portion of the inheritance, but every lie required another lie to support it. Before I knew it, I had created this whole narrative about Dad's business failures, and I couldn't back down without admitting that everything I had told the family was false. Reading Robert's letter filled me with a complex mixture of emotions. There was satisfaction in his admission of guilt, but also a profound sadness for the brother I had once loved, now destroyed by choices that had seemed so reasonable to him at the time. The letter that truly broke my heart came from Mark 6 weeks after the trial. Written from the rehabilitation center where he was receiving psychological counseling, it was raw, honest, and devastating to read. Mom, he wrote, I've been in therapy every day since the trial, trying to understand how I became someone capable of participating in what was done to you. Dr. Rodriguez says that admitting what I did is just the first step in a very long journey toward redemption. I know I can't undo the pain I caused you. I know I can't take back the 2 years of hell I helped put you through. But I want you to know that every day in here, I think about the mother you were to me, the values you tried to teach me, and I try to figure out how I lost my way so completely. The truth is, I was seduced by the idea of easy money and intimidated by Uncle Robert's confidence, When he said you were being unreasonable about the inheritance, I wanted to believe him because it was easier than questioning what he was telling us or standing up for what I knew was right. The letter was devastating to read, but it also contained something I hadn't heard from Mark in years: genuine accountability and a commitment to real change. Whether we would ever have a close relationship again remained to be seen, but I found some peace in knowing that he was finally confronting the weakness and greed that had made him vulnerable to Robert's manipulation. The most healing development was Lisa's response to the trial's outcome. 3 weeks after the verdict, she appeared at my temporary apartment, tears streaming down her face and her voice breaking with emotion. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she sobbed, throwing her arms around me. "I was a coward. I knew what Uncle Robert was doing to you was wrong, but I was too scared to stand up to him and Mark. I was afraid they'd turn on me too, and I chose my own comfort over protecting you." Lisa's apology opened the door to the most honest conversation we'd had in years. She told me about the pressure she'd felt from the family, about her own financial fears, and about how she'd convinced herself that staying neutral was somehow better than taking sides. "I want to make this right," she said. "I want to be the daughter you deserve to have during the worst time of your life. I know I can't change what I did, but I want to spend whatever time we have left showing you that I remember who you really are and what you taught me about right and wrong." Lisa's commitment to making amends was genuine and profound. She became my advocate, my companion, and my strongest supporter as I began the long process of rebuilding my life from the wreckage that Robert's greed had created. The grandchildren's healing process was slower and more complex. Tom and Emily had been manipulated and used as weapons against me, and they carried deep trauma from watching their family implode so publicly. But with therapy and Lisa's support, they began reaching out tentatively, asking questions about what had really happened and expressing their own confusion and growing understanding. Grandma Tom said during one of our first real conversations after the trial, "I don't understand how Uncle Robert convinced me to say those things about you. I know you're not crazy, and I've always known that. But somehow, he made me feel like I had to choose between loving you and protecting our family." Emily's journey was even more painful as she struggled with guilt over the video she had made dismissing my old court records. "I didn't know those books were important," she cried. "I thought they were just boring old stuff. I didn't know you had used them to help so many people." The healing process would take years, but seeing the genuine remorse and love in their eyes gave me hope that the bonds Robert had tried to sever could eventually be stronger than before. Brenda faced her prison sentence in the complete isolation that her choices had created. Abandoned by what remained of her social circle and facing financial ruin from the legal judgments against her, she entered prison as alone as she had tried to make me. The victory was complete but bittersweet. My inheritance had been restored with substantial additional damages for the emotional suffering I had endured. My reputation had been cleared, my dignity restored, my family relationships rebuilt on a foundation of truth rather than lies. But the cost had been enormous. My brother was in prison, my son was in rehabilitation, my grandchildren were traumatized, and years of my life had been consumed by a battle I never should have had to fight. Still, as I sat in my small apartment surrounded by the legal documents that proved my vindication and the letters from family members asking for forgiveness, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over 2 years: peace. The truth had prevailed, justice had been served, and the people who truly loved me were finding their way back to the light. 3 years after the trial that changed everything, I wake each morning in my carefully restored home with a sense of profound gratitude that still surprises me. The small house that I had almost lost to Robert's fraud has been transformed back into the sanctuary it was always meant to be. Every room has been carefully returned to its original warmth and dignity, filled once again with my professional archives, family photographs, and the countless small treasures that tell the story of a life dedicated to preserving truth and legal integrity. The restoration process had been both practical and deeply therapeutic. Each document returned to its proper file, each photograph rehung on the wall, each piece of furniture placed exactly where it belonged, represented not just the recovery of my material possessions, but the reconstruction of my identity and my sense of purpose in the world. My health has improved dramatically since the stress and fear that had nearly killed me were finally removed from my life. The heart problems that had hospitalized me during the worst of the fraud have stabilized, and my doctor says I have the vitality of someone 10 years younger. Freedom from manipulation and psychological abuse, it turns out, is a powerful medicine. I've reestablished my presence in the local community, volunteering at the courthouse archives and helping the Historical Society organize their legal document collections. My expertise is valued again, my judgment, trusted, my contributions welcomed. The professional respect that Robert and Brenda had tried to destroy has been restored and enhanced by my story of survival and vindication. My relationship with Mark continues to evolve slowly and carefully through his letters from the Rehabilitation Center. His journey toward redemption is genuine and profound, marked by brutal honesty about his failures and a deep commitment to psychological healing that gives me cautious hope for our future. Mom, he wrote in his most recent letter, I'm learning that the weakness I showed during Uncle Robert's campaign wasn't just about greed or fear. It was about my fundamental lack of courage to stand up for what I knew was right. I let other people define reality for me instead of trusting my own moral compass. He's begun participating in programs for inmates who have damaged their family relationships through financial crimes, working with other men who are trying to understand how they became capable of betraying the people they loved most. I hope someday I can earn the right to ask for your forgiveness, he continued. But even if that day never comes, I want you to know that I'm becoming the man you deserve to have as a son. While our relationship may never fully recover the closeness we once shared, I've found peace in knowing that he's genuinely working to understand and address the character flaws that made him vulnerable to manipulation. His transformation gives me hope that even the deepest damage can be healed with commitment and courage. The most beautiful aspect of my new life has been the complete healing of my relationship with Lisa. My daughter has become my closest companion, my strongest advocate, and my most treasured source of joy. We spend hours together exploring local historical sites, organizing family documents, and simply enjoying each other's company in ways that were impossible when our relationship was shadowed by Robert's lies. I think what happened to our family taught me the difference between being passive and being peaceful. Lisa reflected during one of our recent conversations. I spent so many years trying to avoid conflict that I forgot about standing up for what's right. You never forgot that even when it cost you everything. Lisa has become my partner in the advocacy work that has given my later years such profound meaning and purpose. Together, we speak at conferences about elder abuse, prevention work with legal organizations to help other families facing inheritance fraud and support survivors who are fighting their own battles against family manipulation. Tom and Emily have healed beautifully from the trauma they experienced, and our relationship has been rebuilt on a foundation of complete honesty about what happened during those dark years. They're both in college now, and they regularly visit to help me organize my archives and listen to stories about our family's true history. Grandma, Emily said during a recent visit, "I want to study law so I can help people the way you helped yourself. I want to be someone who fights for truth, even when it's hard and scary." Tom has developed a deep interest in historical document preservation, inspired by seeing how my meticulous record-keeping ultimately saved our family from Robert's fraud. "You showed me that keeping accurate records isn't just about paperwork," he told me. "It's about preserving truth for the people who come after us." Robert remains in prison, serving his sentence in the isolation that his choices created. I feel no satisfaction in his suffering, only a kind of philosophical sadness about the way greed and desperation ultimately destroy those who embrace them. His letters stopped coming after the first year, and I've heard through legal channels that he's withdrawn completely into himself, unable to face the magnitude of what his choices cost our entire family. Brenda serves her sentence in similar isolation, abandoned by the social circles she had worked so hard to impress. Her calculated ambitions, her dreams of status and wealth, built on theft and manipulation, have crumbled into the bitter loneliness that such schemes always produce. The most meaningful development in my new life has been my work as a national advocate for elder abuse prevention and family integrity preservation. Using my story as a powerful example of both the devastation that inheritance fraud can cause and the possibility of justice and recovery, I've spoken at conferences across the country, testified before congressional committees about the need for stronger elder protection laws, and worked with legal organizations to help other families facing similar challenges. My memoir, The Ledger of Truth, A Court Archivist's Fight for Family Honor, became a bestseller and has generated thousands of letters from readers who recognize their own struggles in my story. Many have found the courage to seek help for their own situations, armed with the knowledge that sophisticated family manipulation can be overcome and that legal systems can work for justice when properly engaged. The local historical society that I help organize has become my chosen family, a circle of dedicated volunteers who share my passion for preserving truth and helping others understand the importance of accurate documentation. These friends have become my closest confidants, offering the kind of unconditional support and understanding that biological family members sometimes cannot provide. My life is often filled with laughter now. Lisa's voice in the kitchen as she prepares dinner, Tom and Emily's animated discussions about their studies and their plans to make the world more just, the gentle conversations of historical society members as we work together on projects that preserve our community's heritage. As I sit in my garden each evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose, I often reflect on the journey that brought me to this place of peace and purpose. The pain of those dark years hasn't disappeared entirely. The scars of betrayal run deep, and I still sometimes wake in the night, remembering the terror of being homeless and abandoned by those I loved most. But I've learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting or pretending the pain never existed. It means integrating the lessons of that pain into a life of greater wisdom, deeper compassion, and more authentic relationships. The woman who emerged from that crucible is stronger, more purposeful, and more at peace than the woman who entered it, though the cost of that transformation was almost unbearable. My life now is defined not by what was taken from me, but by what I chose to build from the wreckage. I have my dignity, my home, my family relationships based on truth rather than obligation, and most importantly, a sense of purpose that comes from helping others avoid the traps that nearly destroyed me. The victory was worth fighting for, even though the price was higher than I ever imagined it could be. Truth did prevail, justice was served, and a life of authentic purpose and meaningful connection proved to be possible, no matter how dark the circumstances seemed. Years have passed since that devastating letter from Mr. Hayes announcing my father's supposed debt, and as I look back on the journey from that moment of initial shock to this place of profound peace, I'm struck by how completely my understanding of family strength and happiness has been transformed. My life today radiates an inner peace that was hard-won through the crucible of the most devastating betrayal imaginable. This house, once threatened by greed and manipulation, has become a sanctuary filled with authentic joy and meaningful purpose. The laughter of Lisa and my grandchildren echoes through rooms that once felt like they might be lost forever. Friends from my advocacy work, colleagues from the Historical Society, and fellow survivors who've become like family regularly gather around my dining room table, creating the kind of chosen community that's built on shared values rather than accidents of birth. I've become a nationally recognized voice in the fight against elder abuse and inheritance fraud. My story serving as both a warning about the insidious nature of family financial exploitation and a beacon of hope for those who find themselves trapped in similar nightmares. The memoir I wrote has touched thousands of lives, and the letters I receive from readers often tell me that my experience gave them the courage to seek help when their own families tried to exploit their trust and love. The greatest lesson I've learned through this ordeal is that my strength never lay in silent endurance or keeping peace at any cost, but in my willingness to courageously reclaim my narrative and fight for my fundamental rights and dignity. I discovered that self-worth is truly unshakable when it's built on truth and integrity rather than other people's approval, and that authentic family connections are those based on love and respect, not manipulation or financial convenience. I carry no bitterness toward those who betrayed me so completely. Robert's desperation and Mark's weakness were tragic flaws that destroyed their own lives far more completely than they ever harmed mine. Even Brenda's calculated cruelty ultimately served to clarify what really matters in life and what doesn't. Their choices revealed their character, while my response to their betrayal revealed mine. To anyone listening to my story who recognizes echoes of their own struggles with family manipulation, inheritance disputes, or the profound loneliness that can come with standing up for what's right, I want you to know this truth really does prevail even when the battle seems hopeless. Human dignity can be reclaimed even after the most devastating attacks. A life of purpose and authentic connection is always possible, no matter how complete the destruction may seem. The spirit of resilience that carried me through the darkest valley of my life continues to sustain me in these golden years of advocacy and authentic relationships. My commitment to preserving truth in legal documentation, tested by the cruelest manipulations imaginable, emerged not just intact, but stronger and more precise than ever before. The principles I spent 40 years upholding proved their worth when everything else was stripped away. Most importantly, I learned that happiness isn't about having the family you were born into treat you well, but about creating the life you can live with integrity and peace. The woman who sits in this garden today, surrounded by people who love her for who she really is, rather than what she might provide them, is more content and fulfilled than the woman who began this journey, believing that family loyalty was always worth any sacrifice. Sometimes, the most profound courage is found not in grand gestures, but in the quiet determination to keep fighting for truth when everyone around you has chosen the easier path of lies and compromise. Sometimes the greatest victory is not in defeating your enemies, but in refusing to become like them, no matter how much they take from you. I am 71 now, and I have never been more certain that love, honesty, and respect for human dignity will always triumph over greed and manipulation, no matter how sophisticated the deception or how powerful those who perpetrate it may seem. The truth is worth fighting, for dignity is worth defending, and hope is always justified, even in the darkest hours of family betrayal.